what I wanted to share with you this morning is where I come from. I'm a fifth generation Australian, Scottish descent, and I grew up in the average family home. I'm one of 5 children. We had sausages and chops and mashed potatoes and frozen peas every night of the week, except for Sunday when Mum cooked the roast lamb. I didn't know there was any such thing in the whole world as brown bread, because we just always had white bread. And then I must have been about 17, I had a boyfriend who had a friend who was a vegetarian. I'd never heard of a vegetarian before. And so I went to this restaurant, we went out, and I discovered cauliflower and hunza pie with brown rice and spinach. I'd never ever seen such things before. So I decided to become a vegetarian, and my family really laughed at me. About that time, my mother was very sick. My mother was a cripple in a wheelchair with rheumatoid arthritis. And she'd gone through many medical things and was just getting worse and worse. And I met a lady named Daisy. Now, by this time, I was living with my partner, and I had a little girl, and I had a little baby boy, and Mum was in a wheelchair. She was in Sydney, and I was up near Newcastle, and I met a lady named Daisy. And she was a Seventh-day Adventist. I'd never heard of a Seventh-day Adventist before. And I told her about my mother. She said, "I think I can help your mother." And so I told my father. He flew straight up to see Daisy, and he said, "I think Daisy can help." So we flew Mum up to see Daisy. At this stage, Mum was only 5 stone. She could not walk. She was very deformed. Her knees were very swollen. Her hands were like this, and she could not pick things up. And Daisy, little by little, did natural remedies on her. I'd never heard of natural remedies before. And she fasted her and massaged her, and she got her off all her medication, and she was now pain-free. And now it was time to bring Mum back home. But Mum did not want to go any further with it. And so Mum very quickly deteriorated, and her pains came back. My father put her in hospital. He didn't know what else to do with her. I travelled down to visit to see if I could talk to Mum, and we got a call in the morning that she died in the night. She was only 51. And my father said, "Your mother need not have died. Your mother believed that she would, and she would." Now, I had worked as a psychiatric nurse before I had children, so I was very, very interested in the emotional and the mental aspect of disease. And the lecture that I gave you at 9:30 really is an outcrop of me looking at alternative ways to heal mental illness. I see people heal now. I didn't see people heal as a psychiatric nurse. So it was a great concern for me that my mother had just passed. Now, my little children were getting colds and things like that, and I didn't want to treat them with drugs. I'd seen what Daisy had done with my mum. And so I began to ask people, and little by little I developed different ways to treat the children. About that time, I got to know some people who were living next door. I was 25, and this couple was 25 and 26. They'd just become Christians. And I remember she came to my house one day and she said, "Would you like to do a Bible study?" Now, I was greatly offended with this. I said, "No, thank you." I did not want to do a Bible study. And I was almost offended that she'd asked me such a thing. I just wanted to be friends with her and talk about health. Unfortunately, about that time, my partner had an affair with another woman, and I was heartbroken. And this couple took me in, and they would pray for me, and I began to become interested. And they said, "Barbara, all you have to do is give your heart to God." And I said, "How do you do that?" And they said, "Just say, 'Father, come into my heart.'" So in quiet moments when I was alone, I'd say, "Father, come into my heart." But nothing would happen. I wanted to know how you did this. I wanted what they had. They had a peace that I wanted, but I didn't know how to do it. My first husband was not, well, my partner was not very happy with me getting interested in religious things. So I used to be very quiet about it. They gave me a book called Desire of Ages about the life of Jesus, but I couldn't read it. They said, read the Bible. And I got to the part where Aaron held Moses' hands up and they won the battle, but his hands went down, they lost the battle, and I thought, I don't know what all this is about. I found it very, very hard. And then they gave me a book called Your Bible and You, and it talks about how the Bible's written, and I read through that book and it just made sense. And I saw a picture, and it was a picture of Jesus knocking on a door, but there was no handle on the outside. And it really struck my heart. It said, behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if any man hear my voice and open the door, he says, I will come in. And I thought to myself, maybe that's how you do it. And I got down on my knees. I now had an understanding of what it was about. And I said, Father in heaven, I give you everything. I give you my children. I give you my life. And when I got up, I felt a peace. And I thought, maybe I've done it. maybe I have done it. You know, as the days went by, I decided to pray every morning. I started to read, and I found that I could read a lot easier. And my friends gave me a little book called Steps to Christ. And this book goes through the steps. And we got to a chapter, and it talks about the will. In fact, it is so good, and it explained it so well, I've memorized it. It says, it's page 47, it says, what we need to understand is the true force of the will. This is the governing power in the nature of man. It is the power of decision or of choice. You cannot change your heart. You cannot of yourself give to God its affections. And when I read that, I thought, well, what can you do? And then the next sentence tells you, it says, but you can give him your will. He will then work in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Through that right action of the will, an entire change can be made in the life. And that's why I love the previous lecture, because I now know it's in the frontal part of the brain where your reason, intellect, judgment, and will is. So you use your intellect, your reason, and your judgment to make your decisions. And that's what I had done. Do you know, it was the start of a different life. I actually stopped smoking marijuana. I stopped drinking alcohol. And my partner was not happy. He was not happy at all. And I tried to explain it to him, but he was just get very, very angry. And so then we moved up into the rainforest. And that was about an hour behind Coffs Harbour. And even though we moved in the rainforest, I continued to read the Bible. And so my journey of becoming a Christian, my journey of understanding natural therapies basically goes hand in hand. And there's a lovely verse, it's Psalm 6 verse 8, and I made it mine. God says, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way that thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. And I read that and I claimed that. And little by little, as the children got sick and I'd have books and I'd try different things out on them, my son Peter had very, very bad asthma. And he was my 5th child, so the children keep coming. We've got a few more children now. And Peter's birth was quite amazing because they thought I had a long time to go, and my baby came quickly and I just delivered him myself. In fact, they came into the room and there I was holding the baby's head. They nearly hit the roof. But I didn't realise that Peter was going to become very, very ill. In fact, I think it first happened when he got a cold about 5 months old, and he went into breathing distress. And I just burst into tears. This child could hardly breathe. And so I took him to the doctor because I tried the garlic on the feet and I tried the poultices, all the other things I'd tried, but it didn't do a lot with Peter. And they said, Peter has asthma. He's got severe physiological asthma. He will need Ventolin. So when I went into the hospital, they would give him Ventolin and that would open the bronchioles. And then I read an article in the paper and it said Ventolin reduces lung capacity. I thought my asthmatic son needs all the lungs that he can get. How come Peter got asthma? Well, my sister and my father both have asthma. My sister was 8 years younger than me, and I used to sit by her bed. She was my baby. I used to read to her. I used to stroke her. I saw ambulance come to our house and take her to hospital. So it actually touched a few nerves with me that now my baby had asthma. I remember we got back from town one night, and I'd started to know a few things I could do because I went to the naturopath and he told me to do hot and cold compresses on his chest. He told me to stop all wheat and dairy. We're only having a little bit. And he said to give him licorice and slippery elm. So I'd started to do a few things. Peter was about 14 months old, mostly breastfed. And we come back from town late one night. Now we're way up in the mountains. And there was a storm. And when you're up in the mountains and you don't have electricity and there's a storm raging and you got 5 kids, I've got the baby, it's quite a thing to get them out of the van and into their bed. And I could see that Peter was struggling with his breathing. You see, his nostrils would flare with every breath, and from his neck to his hips, the body would go like this with every breath. It's so scary. And I said to my partner, he's very ill. We need to take him to hospital. And he said, no, he's not that bad. We can't. Look at the storm. The kids are all asleep. He'll be all right. And he went to bed. Now, for me to do hot and colds, I have to put him down and get everything ready. But if I put him down, he would get distressed and then his breathing would get worse. So I thought, what do I do? I'm in the rainforest. I can't do anything. I thought, I'll go to bed, I'll sit up, and I'll just hold Peter, and I'm going to pray all night and fight for the life of my child. There was nothing else I could do. My hands were totally tied. So I sat there, and I just started praying, Father in heaven, just my child, my child, my child. And I'd fall asleep. And I'd wake up and I'd feel terribly guilty because I'm supposed to be fighting for the life of my child. And I'd try again, fighting for the life of my child. And I'd fall asleep again. And I'd wake up and he's still breathing, but it's in breathing distress. And I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I kept falling asleep. I was failing my post. So I did something that it's very, very hard to do. I just said, Father in heaven, you can have him. It's very hard to do that. I said, he's yours. Just take him. And of course, I, in my humanity, thought I was killing my child. But I knew I couldn't stay at my post anymore. So I just surrendered him to God. I said, take him. He's yours. And I fell asleep. And I woke up in the morning, and Peter was still alive. And he had no more breathing distress. No person on the planet knows what happened that night. No one knows. You don't tell anyone. Who do you tell? My mother was dead. Maybe she would understand. My partner, he wouldn't understand. He'd probably think I was silly. And you just get up in the morning and you thank God that he didn't die that night. And you just go about your day. You do the washing and you fix the children. But you know there's a God in heaven. He watches everything that you do. And he sends angels to help you. No mother is ever alone. No father is ever alone. And I think only the God of heaven knows the struggles of a mother's heart. Do you know what I realized as time went on? I can't save the life of my child. Only God can. And God was waiting for me to give my child to God. And I thought that I had to fight for the life of my child. I can heal no one. I can save no one. God has given us principles that if we adhere to them, our body can heal. But God is the healer, and he can touch us with healing. But he gave us hands, he gave us minds to do it. And that's why that thrilling story of that little boy who was healed from his asthma. Do you know, there are many methods of healing, but there are only one that God approves of, because God put into our body our self-healing mechanism. and he also gives us knowledge on the treatments or the conditions required to actually stimulate that healing process. Peter got stronger and stronger. And there is one situation I'll tell you about, because the naturopath said, if you give him an enema, it will ease his breathing distress. Peter was 14 months at the time. How do you give a 14-month-old an enema? And I thought to myself, I've got to distract him. Right at the point, I put the enema nozzle in. Now, Peter had an older brother, James. So Peter's 14 months old. James was probably about 8 at the time. And James had a submarine. And it had a little motor in it. You put a battery in, and the motor goes around. And Peter loved this submarine and outboard motor. But Peter wasn't allowed to touch it. Sometimes James would let Peter stand nearby and watch. That was it. And Peter would count it a great honour to just watch the motor. So I went to James and I said, James, Peter's very sick and we need to give him an enema and I need to distract him. Would you agree for him to just hold the motor and we'll put the propeller on just as... And James agreed. And it's very important, parents, to work with the will of your child. I'm not going to take that motor. I need to show my son respect. This is a valuable toy. He agreed. I said, thank you, James. So we set everything up, laid Peter on the floor, got the towels, got the enema kit, and I nodded to James, and James gave Peter it's like a little cylinder with the propeller on the end. And Peter looked at it. He looked at James, he looked at me. He's not allowed to touch this thing, and he's allowed to touch it. And just as I'm about to insert the enema, I nodded to James, and he turned the little knob or whatever, and the propeller started going round, and Peter went, and you could have done anything to Peter at that point. And so I inserted the enema, I put about a cup in, I massaged his tummy, and Peter's just in seventh heaven, watching this little propeller go around. And then we just sat Peter on a little pot, and about then James came and took it, and Peter just nodded because Peter knew it was a great honour even to hold that for a minute. Now, so I'm just showing you too that you've got to work with the will of your children to be able to do such things. Now that enema took breathing distress from 24 hours down to 5 hours. Oh, it made such a difference. And then we do hot and colds on his chest. And I'd sit him here and I'd have the hot and colds and we'd have a whole pile of books and we'd read stories to distract Peter. Every time Peter got a cold, within 24 hours, he'd be in breathing distress. It was just a pattern that happened. What I also had to do is not feed him when he had the breathing distress. I would just feed him watermelon. So what I'd do is I'd have one child in the bedroom reading stories to Peter while we all ate, and then we'd clean all that up, and then the child that didn't eat, we'd have a meal out the back for him, because, you can't say to a child, you can't have this meal while everyone's meal. And I just gave him watermelon. That certainly helped. The herbs certainly helped. So by the time Peter's 2, he's not getting breathing distress much, and I found that it didn't last very long at all. When Peter was 2.5, I gave birth to my 6th child. And Peter had a cold, and fear rose up in me. But you know what Bible says about fear? In 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, the Bible says, this is God speaking, I've not given you the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. Beautiful verse. So I would not let my mind go to fear. Remember, I want to birth this baby, and I want to birth this baby naturally, and I don't want to fear that Peter's got a breathing distress while I'm giving birth to my baby. The birth went very easily, especially because I've been squatting all pregnancy and the whole baby actually just flew out of me with one push and they had to catch the baby. So praise God for a simple birth. And as soon as the baby was born, because the baby was so quick, the children were having lunch, so they were all called. And Peter crawled up on the bed. I remember Peter standing there and looking at my our new little baby, and then I went straight home. But Peter's cold never developed into breathing distress. Praise be to God. Do you know there's a verse in the Bible, I think it's 1 Corinthians 10:13, where it says that there's no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. And God will not tempt you above what ye are able. And with that temptation, he'll make a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. At the age of 2.5, Peter's not having asthma anymore. In fact, he never had asthma again. Now, he had severe physiological asthma. At the age of 7, the naturopath called me. He said, "Barbara, I'm about to speak at the Asthma Foundation. I want you to tell me the details of Peter," because he said, "You know more about asthma than I do now." He said, "Peter's the worst case I have ever seen." So I told him what I did. I told him about the herbs and about the foods we'd stopped. I told him about plantain. Plantain, you'd see it out in the grass. It's a herb that's an expectorant. I used to give Peter lots of plantain. I'd boil it up, put a bit of lemon and honey, and he loved his plantain tea, and it strengthens lungs. So there's a whole lot of bits and pieces I did. 3 days later, the naturopath rang me. He said, they were a little bit hesitant at first, but he said after a while, the people softened and listened to what I had to say. I think he just told the story of Peter. He said, when I'd finished, a lady came up, and he said it was as if she was explaining Peter. Severe physiological asthma. He was on cortisone every day and cortisone puffers, and he had to have enemas to help him go to the toilet because his medication constipated him so much, and the doctors had given him 2 weeks to live. He was 7, the same age as Peter. And then the naturopath said to me, "And look at Peter." I remember the naturopath said, "Everything you're doing to Peter is going to be as strong as an ox." In the back of my book, there's a picture of Peter. In the back of my book, I've got my children in my ages. The little one at the end is me. So there's me, then my daughter and my son. 2 more daughters. So the second last one is Peter. He's got muscles like this. He is as strong as an ox. So I know that genetics may load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Peter was born with strong genes towards the asthma, but from the age of 3, no more asthma. And remember what the naturopath said? This was the most severe case he had ever seen. It was severe physiological asthma. So I praise God that we have been given a body that, being born in 2018, and we weren't always born in that, I was born in 1953, we have all been born with some genetic weaknesses, but it need not control us. And that's where I feel that I play a part. I feel that I have been called to be a teacher. And you can see by the experiences I just gave you that sometimes they were very heartbreaking experiences, but I learned so much. One lady said to me when I said, "But I have no qualifications," she said, "You've got 6 BAs, BA, be wise," that you learn much by helping those. And so life went on, and every morning I would pray, "Father in heaven, what do you want me to do? What can I do for you?" And he would impress on my mind, "Your children, your children." But one morning, I got a different impression in my mind. He said, "Put meetings together and teach young mothers how to treat their children naturally." I was so excited. And then I ran into the children. We'd always read the Bible every morning, and I was reading another book. It was called The Testimonies. And I sat down and started to read, and I got to the point, we were just up to this point, and it said, "Meetings should be given to teach the people how to do natural remedies." I just about screamed. I said, "Children, God has just impressed me in my prayer, and now he's confirmed it in what we were reading." So I went to church, the little church up in the hills we'd go to, and I told them. And one of the elders said, "Great, we'll have meetings every Saturday afternoon." And I said, "Oh, just wait a minute. I've got to put a few things together." I felt that I didn't know anything. So I got my anatomy and physiology book out, and I got some other books I had, and I gave 6 meetings. The first 2 meetings were hydrotherapy, and I would demonstrate on the children, because the children were used to me doing all sorts of things to them. So I'd have one in a hot foot bath there, and I'd wrap one up in a wet sheet and a blanket and have him there, and I'd do hot and cold compresses on my son James, because by now James is about 14. And so I do all of these demonstrations on the children. And so first 2 were hydrotherapy, that's water therapy. Now I just learnt this from a book I had on Dr. Kellogg's water cures, and just whatever the book said, I just did. So I practiced on the children at home. I'd already practiced on them at home, and that's what I demonstrated in the meeting. And then the next meeting was poultices. So I'd pulverise up charcoal from my fire, and I'd make poultices out of that. By the way, next year, SBS Television are doing a documentary called The Great Australian Cure. And they contacted me a few months ago and asked if I'd talk on charcoal. So I'll be talking on charcoal there. So I learnt charcoal, and I'd put garlic and just different things. If you go to my poultice DVD, it's on YouTube. It's basically all the bits and pieces I'd learnt to do. And so I'd wrap all the children up in all these poultices. And then the next meeting was herbs. And the herbs I did was just the herbs growing out in the garden. I'd talk on dandelion, I'd talk on chickweed, I'd talk on radium, and I definitely would talk on plantain, because I believe plantain played a main role in Peter recovering from his asthma. Psalm 104 verse 14, the Bible says God gave herbs for the service of man. Those herbs come in to serve you, to strengthen you, to heal you. Not one dose, but we gave a lot of plantain tea to Peter. I'd even get fancy straws, and he was drinking huge amounts of it. So back to the meetings. They're the first 4 meetings. The 5th meeting was the 8 laws of health I touched on last night. That's found in the little book Ministry of Healing. And then the final 6th meeting, I talked on food. And then we got all the ladies in church. We gave them recipes to do healthful foods. And this is a tiny little country church in Dorrigo. You might have heard of Dorrigo. Do you know, the first meeting, 40 people came. The church members were so excited. They'd never seen anything like this. And then I was contacted by someone who heard about it. So then I went down to Ballarat. Now this is about 1992. And they wanted all my children to come, because they wanted me to demonstrate on the children. They said it won the hearts of the people when all the children were there. And so that was my journey of learning natural remedies. It was really cause and effect. Now about this time, my first husband was getting very heavily into marijuana, and he was smoking 30 joints a day, so life was getting a little bit hard in the rainforest. And one night he threatened me with a gun. It was a very, very scary night, and I realised that I had to go. So the next day, it was Sabbath morning, and we're all going to church. And I had it in my mind, because I was just awake most of the night, just terrified, planning my escape. So the next day, I thought, we're going to church, but I won't come home. So I said to my children, pack extra clothes we'll go for a walk in the afternoon. And I packed lunch, as we always did, because we're an hour from church, way up in the hills behind Dorrigo. And I put some oats and some soy milk and different things underneath lunch, because I thought, well, that'll be our breakfast the next day, and then I don't know what I'm going to do after that. And I know that the church has a hall, and it has a kitchen and a bathroom, so we could use that. And they have mattresses, so I'm sure we'll be able to do something like that. So I got up in the morning, and you know, with an alcoholic cycle, they can be screaming and threatening and all terrible one, but in the morning everything's all right. So in the morning everything was all right. And he said, what time are you coming home? I said, I don't know. He said, are you coming home? I said, no. He said, well, you're not going anywhere. And I thought, oh dear, I'll have to change this a bit. So I said, all right, I'll come home. And he knew I would not lie. But in the back of my mind, I thought, I'm a woman, you know, we can change our minds. So when we drove out that day, I had one last look at my roses, at my mountain home, because I knew I would not come back. In fact, when it got difficult, even a month before, I'd be thinking, the lettuces are about to be picked. Where will I find 7 beds? Where will I find a washing machine? It's just overwhelming. And when a woman is having a hard time and she stays, I've heard people say, stupid woman, why doesn't she leave? You don't know. You're terrified. And you don't know how. You don't know how. And you think if you get out, they'll come after you. It's a terrifying thing. And so you stay. And then it gets really bad. And when it gets really bad, the lettuces and the roses fade into significance. It might sound silly. That's, I suppose, what I thought as a woman. And we left. And I knew that I would not come back, because I knew that I could not stay in a home, because he'd got a gun that night and I'd heard him go to the billy where the bullets were kept. It was a terrifying night. But in the morning, everything was all right. I got to church, and the little tiny church, I think 40 people, but not always 40 there, and the ladies came out. Oh, how they loved us. When we started going to that church, it was instantly half full with all my children. And when I got out of the car, I just burst into tears. I'd hardly had any sleep. And the ladies said, what? And I told them. And the men said, let us go to the police. Please let us go to the police. I said, no, you're terrified, just terrified. No. And we went to church, and my children were there. My children were very quiet. I remember about a month before, a lady had come to me and she said, Barbara, what's happening in your home? She said, I look at the faces of your children and I think, what's happening in that home? Oh dear, you think it's all right. You think you try and make it all right. And that just broke my heart. I wanted to think that they were protected, that it was all right. It wasn't until I left that I started to realise that how bad it was, really. And so when I said to the ladies, we'll just stay in the hall and you're coming to our house. Do you know, that afternoon I had ladies, church members bring me money, slipping money to me, food, clothes. It's so nice to be part of that little church family. And we're having lunch, and Peter, he's 8. We're having lunch and he looked at me and he said, are you going to ring Dad now? Tell him that you're not coming home? That you've changed your mind? I thought, how does he know that? Do you know, the children see everything more than we think they do. So I rang him up in the afternoon. I said, we're not coming home. I've changed my mind. We're not coming home. He said, I'm so sorry. Everything will be all right. It'll never happen again. Do you know, all I want is to go home. That's all I want. It's my home. So hard. I said, no, we can't. We can't come home. That was so hard to do that, because all I wanted is to go home. That was very, very hard. And we went to a lady's house, and my daughter thought she was a very wealthy lady because she had 40 pillows. She had places for all of us. Midweek, I found a house. Do you know, no one will rent a house to a woman with 6 children. I rang up a few places. How many children do you have? 6. How many? 6. 6. Oh, no. Oh, so hard. You can't get a place. I finally found a place that was a house in a caravan park. It was a big old house, and it had 5 bedrooms. It was sort of verandas had been built in, and a lady agreed to see me, even though and I went with the lady I was staying with, and as soon as I walked into the room, the whole room was flooded with sun. And I felt God was saying, this is your house. And I looked at the lady and I got $50 out and I said, can I have it? And she said, your children. And the lady with me said, these children are the best children you will ever meet in your life. They're the most wonderful, And she said, all right. And she told me later that her husband just lost it that night when she said she'd rented a house. She'd rented the house to a lady with 6 children. Do you know, the very next morning, we got up, we always gardened. So I went out the back and I saw Hank. He was a German man. He and his wife owned the caravan park. I said, oh, Hank, we'd like to start a veggie garden. And he said, yeah? Well, you can have that plot down there. Do you know, we went down and he came running out with implements. And my daughter started to help with the cleaning. She started to bake bread and sell it in the shop every day. My son James was 15 now. He did all the mowing every afternoon. And it got to the point where they actually thought that we were one of the best things that had ever happened to them. Praise be to God. But after a few months, I saw it wasn't a good influence, because people that live in caravan parks are often low economic. And I remember one lady I used to watch her, she'd come out every day and she'd obviously been beaten up that night. So it was not too bad, because my children were homeschooled, so the children were at school through the day. There were probably about 10 children in this little caravan park. So what I would do is, when the children came home from school, I would go outside and play with them, because if I was there, it was a better tone. And there was cement outside where we lived, so we'd do skipping and we'd do handball. So every afternoon, I was 40. I went out and I played with the kids, and we played cricket and we played handball, because if I was there, it was a better tone. And there was a little boy, and his mother was the one that was beaten up a fair bit. He was only 10, his name was Brendan. He was very small for his age. You could tell he came from a very troubled home, but he was very good at handball. So I got very good at handball too. And I remember he came one afternoon, knocked on my door, and I said, yes, Brendan. He would hardly look at you, he'd always have his head down. He said, will you play handball with me? Oh, what an honour. I dropped everything to play handball with Brendan. Then God opened the door for us to move to a little country house. This house was in terrible disrepair, but the church we were going to, they did 6 working bees, and they got the house up to good working order. And then I started to give meetings in that little church, and we started to give meetings to the public. I was a single mother for 4 years, and then my eldest daughters went to work at a health retreat called Living Valley Springs in Queensland. So one daughter went up, then the other daughter went up, and they started to train in massage and colonic irrigations and lymphatics. And I thought, well, half my kids are up there, I might move up there. So I moved up there. And I was there 1 year, I think, and the business manager asked me to marry him. Michael O'Neill, I told the story this morning. And my whole life changed. And I wanted for nothing after that. He was a very good provider. He had 2 children, I had 6. Now, when we married, the ages were 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 19, 21. Mine 10, he's 11, mine 12. Peter was 12 now, he's 13, and the rest were all mine. So we had a combined family, and we had such fun. Michael's been very, very good to my children. After we'd been there a year, Michael said, I want to start my own health retreat. And this was down in Narberthon. I think it's called Highwood now, yeah. And it was Amazing Facts or Amazing Truth back then. And Michael was asked to start a health retreat there. Some, like yourself, may remember that. So this was about 1998, we came down. And so here we had the health retreat. Now so we only had 5 kids with us at this time, so actually 6 children. The 2 eldest were off and working. So my eldest daughter, Jessica, she was the massage therapist. My next daughter, Julia, she was 15. She was a very proficient cook, so she was our chef. And then the 3 boys, who were something like, I don't know, 13, 12, 11, they were our gardeners, because our children had gardened from a young age. And Michael's daughter, Michaela, I think she was 12 at the time, she was a very good typist. So she was Michael's secretary. So we had our whole team. And I said to Michael, but who will be the health director? He said, you. I said, oh no, I'm just a mother and I help other mothers. He said, you'll be good, and he left the room. Oh, so I had no choice. But you know, I believe that all God's biddings are his enablings. Anything he calls us to do, and I was so shy. I was happy on one-on-one and just little meetings to help people get well. So what Michael used to do, when he would come in, because he is not shy at all. In fact, if he came in there right now, he'd have a big smile on his face and he said, how's it all going? He's not at all shy. So he would start the lecture by telling them about me and our life and our children, and ask me a few questions and slowly draw me in and then get me going, and then I could talk. And I remember he said, Barbara, every time we try and take a photo of you, you put your head down. We can't get a photo of you. I was just so shy. But little by little, I was able to talk more and more. So we had the health retreat in Narberthon for about 4.5 years, I think. And the good news is, God is so good to us, because the first program we had one guest. I could handle that. Next program, I think we had 2. And then a few programs we had 2, and then a little bit more, 3. And we started to average about 6 to 8 guests. And I found that my biggest learning curve was teaching. My biggest learning curve was helping people, making suggestions. So little by little, my knowledge grew, my experience grew. And then Warburton closed down, and we doubled overnight. We went from 10 guests to just about 20 guests. So our retreat got very, very big. We had 3 massage therapists, we had cooks, cleaners, and then the company that basically has that property in a trust changed hands, and they wanted to start their health retreat. Meanwhile, we had bought a property up at the back of Kempsey, which is where we are now. So we have been up there for about 15 years now. And Henry's the guy that's filming me. Henry filmed me about 6 years ago, about 6 years ago. So every few years we film my lectures, because I'm ever learning more. When Henry had finished filming me, he said, do you mind if we put a little section of your lectures on YouTube? And Michael said, go for it. Henry was really moved by this. And Michael said, what's the matter? He said, no one's ever given me permission to do that before. And Michael said, this is not our information, this is God's information. And as many as can be touched, the better. So, you know, if everyone in this room filmed me and put it up on YouTube, I don't mind, because it's God's information, and as many as can be touched, the better. And then we're at a conference, I think a year later, we saw Henry, and Henry ran up and said, 1 million hits. Something like that, is that right? And you know, it's the best thing we have ever done, because it's almost our advertising now. And we get people from all over the world. We get people from Saudi Arabia, from England, from Scotland, from America, who look at YouTube and see the information. And so that's how we blossomed. And Michael said, we cannot fulfill all the speaking engagements that request me to lecture. He said we could close the health retreat and just full-time lecture. But we love the health retreat. And Chelsea, my right-hand girl, she's here with us from America for 3 months. And there are 2 retreats in America now that are running our Misty Mountain program. I think it's popular. I think people love it because it is so simple. And I think for too long it has been complicated. And people say to me, has God given you a gift to make complicated things simple? I said, oh, I think so, but there's something else. It has to be simple for me. Sometimes I have to read something 10 times before I get it. You'd probably get it quicker than I would get it. What I wanted to do this morning was share with you my journey. And what I hope the message you've got from this is, if I can do it, anyone can do it. I'm not a gifted speaker. I make so many mistakes. I mix up my words all the time, like the time I called green barley, bean growly. They're spoonerisms. I just naturally do that. But I just keep talking so no one knows the terrible mistake I've just made. And I just thank God. And the verse I shared earlier, it's found in Isaiah 50 verse 4. And it says, the Lord God hath given me the tongue of the learned. You see that? He is able to give you the tongue of the learned. If he can do it for me, he can do it for anyone. The Lord God hath given me the tongue of the learned, that I may know how to speak a word in season to him that is weary. He wakeneth morning by morning. He wakeneth my ear to hear as the learned. And sometimes I wake up, I have meetings to give today. Father, what do you want me to say? And if in my mind I get a smile and a nod, I think, he's already got it planned. My role is to search out the information. My role is to know it. My role is to know my memory verses. And when I stand up here, I say, are you ready, Father? And the only time he cannot do it through me is if I fear, as if I do not have faith in him. But Isaiah 26 verse 3 states that God will keep us in perfect peace, the one whose mind is stayed upon him, because this mind trusteth in him.